a millionaire found a mother sleeping at a hospital entrance. Her final request broke his heart. A cold mist shrouded Harrison Memorial Hospital on that fateful December night. William Harrison, the billionaire chairman of the hospital board, stepped out after his routine checkup, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished marble steps. Through the swirling fog, he noticed a figure huddled on a wooden bench near the emergency entrance, a woman in a threadbare coat, her shoulders shaking either from cold or tears. Beside her lay a tattered bag and a handwritten sign that read, "Please help save my daughter." He almost walked past, but something in her desperate eyes made him pause. Those eyes somehow hauntingly familiar. Before diving into this touching story, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments and hit the like button. Your engagement means the world to us. William Harrison hadn't always been the billionaire chairman of Harrison Memorial Hospital. Born into a middle-class family in suburban Boston, he had built his fortune through decades of shrewd investments and relentless determination. But wealth, he had learned, couldn't shield him from life's cruelest moments. His corner office on the hospital's top floor offered a commanding view of the city skyline, but he rarely noticed it anymore. The space was meticulously organized, with awards and accolades lining the walls, testament to his success in transforming Harrison Memorial into one of the nation's leading medical institutions. Yet among these symbols of achievement sat a single photograph that captured his attention daily, a young boy's smiling face, frozen in time. Tommy, his only son, had been just 10 when tragedy struck. A routine surgery gone wrong at another hospital had nearly claimed the boy's life. William remembered those harrowing hours in the emergency room, feeling utterly helpless despite all his resources. Tommy had survived thanks to a nurse whose name he'd never properly learned, a fact that now haunted him with increasing frequency. The experience had driven William to acquire and revolutionize Harrison Memorial. Under his leadership, the hospital became renowned for its cutting-edge treatments and world-class medical team. But somewhere along the way, something fundamental had shifted. The compassion that had initially fueled his mission gradually gave way to an obsession with efficiency and profitability. Board meetings became discussions of bottom lines rather than patient care. Charity cases were quietly redirected to public hospitals. The hospital's motto, "Healing with Heart," remained emblazoned across the lobby, but its meaning had hollowed out, much like William's own sense of purpose. His marriage hadn't survived the transformation. Catherine, his wife of 25 years, had left 3 years ago, tired of competing with the hospital for his attention. "You've built a monument to saving lives," she'd said during their last argument, "but you've forgotten how to live." Her words still echoed in his quieter moments. Now, at 62, William Harrison was a man of contradictions. His name commanded respect in Boston's highest circles, yet he felt increasingly isolated. He dominated board meetings with corporate precision, but avoided walking through the patient wards. The hospital's success had become his life's work, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere along the way he'd lost sight of its true purpose. Recent changes in the hospital's operations troubled him more than he cared to admit. The new pricing policies, pushed through by Dr. James Cooper, the ambitious chief of surgery, had made treatments increasingly inaccessible to middle-class families. William had approved them, convincing himself it was necessary for the hospital's growth, but each time he signed off on another rate increase, he thought of his own middle-class origins. His son Tommy, now grown with children of his own, rarely visited the hospital. "It's changed, Dad," he'd said during their last conversation. "It's not the same place you set out to build." William had dismissed the comment as youthful idealism, but the words had lodged in his mind like a splinter. The weight of these thoughts had been pressing on him more heavily lately, manifesting in sleepless nights and increasing visits to Dr. Roberts, his personal physician. The doctor had gently suggested he might be suffering from depression, but William waved off the concern. He wasn't depressed, he was uncomfortable. Something felt fundamentally wrong with the empire he built, but he couldn't or wouldn't identify what. That discomfort had led to his late-night walks through the hospital, though he told himself they were merely routine inspections. These solitary patrols, away from the deferential staff and constant meetings, gave him rare moments of reflection. Sometimes in the quiet hours he could almost remember the passion and purpose that had first driven him to transform this place. But those moments were becoming rarer, replaced by a gnawing sense that he was presiding over something that had lost its soul. Standing in his office that December evening, looking out at the gathering mist, William Harrison couldn't have known that his carefully constructed world was about to be shaken to its foundations. He couldn't have imagined that a chance encounter with a desperate mother on a cold bench would force him to confront everything he'd become and everything he'd forgotten. As he prepared to leave for the night, straightening his expensive tie one final time, fate was already setting in motion events that would challenge every principle he thought he stood for. Sarah Miller's fall from grace at Harrison Memorial Hospital had become something of a whispered legend among the staff. 10 years ago, she had been the hospital's most respected pediatric nurse, known for her extraordinary dedication and almost supernatural ability to calm distressed children. Her colleagues called her the child whisperer, and parents requested her by name for their children's care. At 45, Sarah's face still carried traces of the warmth and beauty that had once lit up the pediatric ward. Years of hardship had etched deep lines around her eyes and mouth, but couldn't erase the fundamental kindness in her expression. Her brown hair, now streaked with grey, was pulled back in a practical bun, a habit from her nursing days she couldn't shake, even though she now cleaned offices for a living. The incident that destroyed her career had seemed minor at first. During a particularly chaotic night shift, she had noticed discrepancies in the medication doses being administered to several children. The amounts didn't match the prescriptions, and the bills showed charges for premium drugs while cheaper alternatives were being used. When she raised her concerns with Dr. James Cooper, the newly appointed chief of surgery, he had dismissed them as clerical errors. But Sarah couldn't let it go. The daughter of a small-town pharmacist, she understood medications too well to ignore the patterns she was seeing. She documented everything meticulously, building a file of evidence that suggested systematic fraud. Children were receiving diluted medications while their families were being charged for full-strength doses. The difference in cost was being pocketed somewhere along the line. The night she finally gathered the courage to take her findings to the hospital board changed everything. But before she could present her evidence, an emergency case arrived: a young boy named Tommy, suffering from severe complications after routine surgery at another hospital. Sarah's instincts took over, and she spent the next 12 hours helping to save the boy's life, forgetting about the board meeting entirely. The next day, before she could reschedule her presentation, all hell broke loose. A child under her care suffered a severe allergic reaction. The investigation that followed claimed she had administered the wrong medication, a rookie mistake that seemed impossible for someone of her experience. Despite her protests, despite her spotless 15-year record, the evidence appeared irrefutable. Her nursing license was suspended, pending further investigation. What Sarah didn't know then was that Dr. Cooper had carefully orchestrated her downfall. The medication error had been deliberately planted, the records altered. By the time she understood what had happened, it was too late. Her reputation was ruined, and her career was over. The evidence she had gathered about the medication fraud mysteriously disappeared from her locker during the investigation. Rather than leave the city where she had lived her entire life, Sarah chose to stay, taking whatever work she could find. Pride prevented her from seeking help from former colleagues, most of whom had distanced themselves anyway, afraid of associating with someone accused of endangering a child. She cleaned offices at night, worked as a home health aide during the day, and somehow managed to keep her small apartment in a run-down building on the city's outskirts. Her daughter Emily became her reason for persevering. Just 7 years old, when the incident occurred, Emily had never doubted her mother's innocence. "You're the best nurse ever." "Mummy," she would say, hugging Sarah on those nights when despair threatened to overwhelm her. "Those kids at the hospital must miss you so much." Those words, spoken with such pure conviction, gave Sarah the strength to keep going. But fate had a cruel twist in store. Emily, now 17 and dreaming of following in her mother's footsteps as a nurse, began experiencing mysterious symptoms. The local clinic couldn't determine the cause, and Emily's condition steadily worsened. When the diagnosis finally came, a rare form of leukemia, the cruel irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The only hospital equipped to treat Emily's condition was Harrison Memorial, the very place that had destroyed their lives. The past decade had taught Sarah much about human nature, its capacity for both cruelty and kindness. She had seen former friends cross the street to avoid her, but also witnessed extraordinary acts of generosity from unexpected sources. The immigrant family in her building shared their food when money was tight. The elderly man whose house she cleaned insisted on paying her extra for emergencies. These small kindnesses had kept her faith in humanity alive, even as she struggled to make ends meet. Now, facing her daughter's illness, Sarah found herself back at Harrison Memorial, but this time as a supplicant rather than a caregiver. The irony was bitter, but she would endure any humiliation, face any ghost from her past, if it meant saving Emily's life. Harrison Memorial Hospital's gleaming facade masked a complex web of corruption that had grown like a cancer under Dr. James Cooper's influence. At 55, Cooper had perfected the art of appearing respectable, while orchestrating schemes that would have shocked the medical community had they come to light. His silver-tongued presentations in board meetings disguised ruthless ambition and a complete disregard for the Hippocratic Oath. The corruption began subtly, almost imperceptibly. As chief of surgery, Cooper established exclusive contracts with pharmaceutical companies that provided kickbacks for using their premium-priced medications. The hospital's pharmacy began stocking only the most expensive brands, while cheaper alternatives mysteriously became unavailable. Insurance companies were billed for top-tier drugs, while patients often received generic substitutes, with the price difference disappearing into a complex network of offshore accounts. Cooper's influence extended beyond mere medication fraud. He had cultivated a loyal circle of administrators and doctors who benefited from his schemes. Department heads received bonuses for reducing unnecessary charity care. Surgeries were scheduled based on insurance coverage rather than medical urgency. Young doctors quickly learned that advancement depended not on their skills but on their willingness to play along with the system. The impact on poor patients was devastating but carefully concealed. Emergency cases were transferred to public hospitals due to conveniently full beds. Complex procedures were delayed until families could arrange financing. The hospital's charitable foundation, once a source of help for needy patients, now focused on high-profile donations that generated positive publicity while actual assistance dwindled. The billing department became a masterpiece of creative accounting. Procedures were coded to maximize insurance payments, often crossing the line into fraud. Patients were charged for consultations that never happened, tests that weren't necessary, and medications that were never administered. Those who questioned their bills found themselves facing an impenetrable bureaucracy designed to exhaust their resolve. What made the system particularly insidious was its apparent legitimacy. Every questionable practice was covered by carefully worded policies. Every financial decision could be justified with impressive-looking spreadsheets and presentations about operational efficiency. And financial sustainability. Cooper understood that the best corruption was the kind that looked like sound business practice. The few staff members who raised concerns found themselves marginalized or forced out, their complaints buried under paperwork or dismissed as misunderstandings. Nurses who questioned medication discrepancies were transferred to less desirable shifts. Doctors who advocated too strongly for their patients' financial interests found their surgical schedules reduced. The message was clear: compliance would be rewarded, conscience would be punished. William Harrison, focused on the hospital's growing prestige and impressive financial returns, remained largely blind to these darker aspects of its operation. The quarterly reports showed record profits, and the hospital's reputation for cutting-edge medical care continued to grow. If he occasionally felt uneasy about certain decisions, Cooper was always there with plausible explanations and impressive statistics. The system seemed perfect, unassailable, but like all corrupted structures, it had its weak points. The increasing number of staff resignations, especially among long-time employees, raised few eyebrows in board meetings but created a growing undercurrent of discontent. The local medical community began noticing patterns in patient transfers that seemed to correlate more with financial status than medical need. Most dangerous of all was the paper trail that couldn't be completely erased. Despite Cooper's careful management, evidence of the corruption existed in scattered pieces throughout the hospital's records. A thorough investigation would reveal the patterns of fraud, the systematic exploitation of vulnerable patients, and the deliberate suppression of those who tried to expose the truth. The tragedy of Harrison Memorial was not just in the corruption itself, but in how it had transformed a once noble institution. The hospital's original mission statement, still carved in stone in the main lobby, spoke of healing with compassion and serving all in need. Now those words stood as an ironic commentary on how far the institution had strayed from its founding principles. Yet even in this corrupted environment, pockets of resistance remained. A few dedicated doctors and nurses continued to fight for their patients, finding creative ways to work around the system. They documented the irregularities they observed, waiting for an opportunity to expose the truth. They remembered Sarah Miller's fate and were more careful, but they hadn't given up. The tension between profit and patient care, between corruption and conscience, created an atmosphere of subtle fear and moral compromise. It was a pressure cooker waiting to explode, needing only the right catalyst to bring everything into the light. That catalyst would arrive in the form of a desperate mother seeking help for her dying daughter, and a hospital chairman finally forced to confront the true nature of the institution he had built. Emily Miller's deterioration happened with frightening speed. One day she was a vibrant high school senior planning her nursing school applications. The next she could barely climb a flight of stairs without gasping for breath. The local clinic's fluorescent lights cast a sickly pallor over her once rosy cheeks as doctors ordered test after inconclusive test. The symptoms started subtly: unusual bruising after minor bumps, persistent fatigue that sleep couldn't cure, nosebleeds that took increasingly longer to stop. Sarah watched helplessly as her daughter's energy drained away, replaced by a bone-deep weariness no 17-year-old should know. Emily tried to hide her symptoms at first, not wanting to worry her mother, who already worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. When the diagnosis finally came, it hit with the force of a physical blow. Acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive and advancing rapidly. The clinic doctor delivered the news with practiced sympathy, but his eyes held real concern. "She needs immediate treatment," he explained, shuffling through his papers. "And not just any treatment. Her genetic markers indicate she needs specialized therapy only available at Harrison Memorial." Sarah felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Of all the hospitals in Boston, it had to be that one. Emily, pale but composed on the examination table, reached for her mother's hand. "It's okay, Mom," she whispered, though they both knew it wasn't. The cruel irony of needing help from the institution that had destroyed their lives wasn't lost on either of them. The financial reality was even more devastating than the diagnosis. The treatment protocol would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Their insurance, basic coverage from Sarah's cleaning job, would cover only a fraction. The clinic doctor, understanding their situation, tried to suggest alternatives, but kept returning to the same conclusion: Harrison Memorial offered the only real hope for Emily's survival. That night, after Emily had finally fallen asleep, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table calculating and recalculating numbers that refused to add up. She'd already sold her car, emptied her modest savings, and borrowed against her future wages. The total amount she could raise wouldn't cover even the initial treatment phase. The apartment's dim light cast shadows across the pile of medical bills and loan rejections, each one a death sentence written in bureaucratic language. Emily's condition worsened with each passing day. The bruises multiplied, her skin taking on an almost translucent quality. She tried to maintain her usual cheerful demeanor, but Sarah could see the fear in her eyes, hear the tremor in her voice when she thought her mother wasn't listening. "I'm not ready to die, Mum," she whispered one night, curled up in pain. "I haven't even started living yet." The words haunted Sarah, driving her to increasingly desperate measures. She approached every charity organization she could find, filled out countless assistance applications, even considered selling their small apartment. But the responses were all the same waiting lists, limited funds, polite rejections. Time was running out, and Emily's symptoms were accelerating. And their neighbors in the run-down apartment building did what they could to help. Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs brought homemade soup. Mr. Chen from the convenience store started a collection jar. The immigrant families in the building contributed what they could spare, which wasn't much but meant everything. Their generosity brought Sarah to tears, but it was like trying to fill an ocean with droplets. The breaking point came when Emily collapsed in the shower, her nose bleeding profusely. The emergency room doctor at the local hospital was blunt without proper treatment. She had weeks, maybe days. He advised them to go directly to Harrison Memorial, regardless of their ability to pay. Sometimes they make exceptions, he said, not meeting Sarah's eyes, for extreme cases. At night, Sarah made her decision. She would return to Harrison Memorial, not as the disgraced nurse she once was, but as a mother fighting for her child's life. She gathered their medical records, scraped together what little money they had, and wrote a simple sign asking for help. Pride had no place in this fight. Emily's life was all that mattered. What Sarah couldn't know, as she prepared for their journey to Harrison Memorial, was that fate had arranged a collision course between past and present. The hospital that had broken her life would become the battleground for saving her daughters. And William Harrison, the man whose son she had once saved without realizing it, would soon be forced to confront both his conscience and the corruption festering within his hospital's walls. The encounter at the hospital entrance unfolded like a scene from a forgotten tragedy. William Harrison stood before Sarah Miller, studying her face with growing unease. There was something about her, a ghost of memory he couldn't quite grasp. The security guard hovering nearby seemed unsure whether to intervene, given Harrison's presence. "Please," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her desperation. "I know I'm not supposed to be here, but my daughter," she fumbled with the manila envelope, pulling out medical records and test results with trembling hands. The papers, though creased and worn from constant handling, were meticulously organized, a habit from her nursing days she couldn't shake. Emily lay in the emergency room behind them, her condition deteriorating by the hour. The local hospital had stabilized her immediate symptoms before transferring her, but everyone knew it was just buying time. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she explained their situation, carefully omitting any mention of her past connection to Harrison Memorial. William listened with growing discomfort. Something about this woman's dignity in the face of desperation touched a chord he'd thought long buried. Her detailed understanding of medical terminology caught his attention. She spoke with the precision of someone familiar with the healthcare system. Yet here she was, clearly destitute, begging for help outside his hospital. "The treatment she needs," Sarah continued, "it's only available here. We've tried everywhere else." She pulled out a wrinkled insurance statement, the inadequate coverage amount circled in red. "I can work out a payment plan. I'll sign whatever you need. Just please don't turn her away." The security guard shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing Sarah, but uncertain how to handle her presence given Harrison's involvement. A young resident hurried past, avoiding eye contact. Another, who remembered the scandal but chose silence. The weight of unspoken history hung heavy in the air. William found himself drawn into the details of Emily's case. The genetic markers, the specific treatment protocol needed. It was exactly the kind of complex case Harrison Memorial specialized in. Under normal circumstances, this would be a straightforward admission. But something in the way the staff avoided looking at Sarah suggested complications he didn't yet understand. "Mr. Harrison," Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, "I know there are proper channels, forms to fill out, committees to approve, but Emily doesn't have time for that. The doctors say." Her voice cracked for the first time. "They say we're looking at days, not weeks." As if on cue, a commotion erupted from the emergency room. Emily had begun seizing, her weakened body finally betraying her. Sarah's professional composure shattered as she rushed to her daughter's side, leaving the scattered papers at William's feet. He watched as she transformed, her movements precise and practiced as she helped the medical team stabilize Emily, revealing a level of medical knowledge that seemed at odds with her current situation. Dr. Cooper appeared, drawn by the commotion. His face darkened upon seeing Sarah, and he quickly pulled William aside. "Mr. Harrison, you should know this woman has a history here. She was terminated for negligence. Allowing her back could create liability issues." But William barely heard him. His attention was fixed on how Sarah worked alongside the emergency team, anticipating their needs, speaking in medical shorthand. This was no ordinary mother. The nagging sense of recognition grew stronger, tugging at memories he'd rather forget. The crisis passed, leaving Emily unconscious but stable. Sarah returned to where William stood, her composure rebuilt but fragile. "You see why we can't wait," she said simply. The unspoken plea in her eyes carried the weight of both present desperation and past injustice. William found himself at a crossroads. Hospital policy was clear about charity cases, especially those involving former employees dismissed for cause. The board would object. Cooper was already shaking his head in warning. Everything about this situation suggested complications best avoided. Yet something about Sarah's quiet dignity, her obvious medical knowledge, and the desperate circumstances nagged at him. The same instinct that had made him a successful businessman now told him there was more to this story than appeared on the surface. As he stood there, watching Sarah gather her scattered papers with trembling hands, William Harrison made a decision that would set in motion events beyond anything he could have imagined. This wouldn't be a simple matter of bending rules for one charity case. Unknown to him, he was about to unravel a web of corruption that reached into the very heart of his hospital and confront truths about himself he'd spent years avoiding. "Get the admission papers started," he told the stunned emergency room clerk. "I'll take personal responsibility for this case." The look of desperate hope on Sarah's face struck him like a physical blow, intensifying the strange sense that he was missing something crucial about this woman and her connection to his past. Dr. James Cooper wasted no time in mounting his opposition to Emily's admission. Within hours of William Harrison's decision, he convened an emergency meeting of the hospital's ethics committee, ostensibly to discuss the risks of treating a patient with insufficient financial coverage. The conference room crackled with tension as Cooper presented his case. "This sets a dangerous precedent," Cooper argued, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light as he paced before the committee. "We already have a waiting list of patients who can afford treatment. Accepting charity cases like this could damage our financial stability." He strategically omitted mentioning Sarah's past at the hospital, saving that ammunition for later. The committee members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Many remembered Sarah from her nursing days, though none dared speak up in her defense. The younger staff members exchanged confused glances, sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. Cooper's influence hung heavy in the room, a silent warning against opposition. Meanwhile, on the oncology floor, more immediate conflicts were unfolding. Nurses who remembered Sarah's disgrace whispered behind their stations, some refusing to take Emily's case. "I won't risk my license working with that woman around." One senior nurse declared, loud enough for Sarah to hear as she sat by her daughter's bedside. The hospital staff divided into subtle factions. A few older nurses and doctors who remembered Sarah's dedication found excuses to check on Emily, offering quiet words of support. Others made their disapproval clear through cold professionalism and minimal interaction. The daily tasks of patient care became a minefield of old grievances and unspoken accusations. Emily, despite her weakened state, noticed the tension. "Mom," she whispered one afternoon, "why do they look at you like that?" Sarah forced a smile, trying to shield her daughter from the weight of the past. But Emily was too perceptive, too aware of the sideways glances and whispered conversations that followed her mother through the hospital corridors. Dr. Cooper's influence manifested in more concrete ways. Emily's treatment faced mysterious delays. Scheduled tests were postponed due to equipment maintenance. Specialized medications became suddenly out of stock. Each obstacle was presented with impeccable professionalism and plausible explanations, but the pattern was clear to those who knew where to look. William Harrison found himself increasingly troubled by the situation. His initial decision to admit Emily had seemed straightforward, but the resulting friction within his hospital was impossible to ignore. Staff members approached him with concerns veiled as professional objections. The board members sent diplomatic inquiries about the precedent being set. The situation escalated when Sarah recognized patterns in Emily's treatment delays. Her years of nursing experience allowed her to see through the administrative excuses. One evening, frustrated by another postponed procedure, she confronted a young resident who had just cancelled Emily's scheduled treatment. "These aren't normal delays," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying years of suppressed anger. "Someone's interfering with my daughter's care." The resident, caught between conscience and career, couldn't meet her eyes. The confrontation was overheard by other staff members, and by morning the incident had reached Cooper's ears. Cooper used the confrontation to his advantage, presenting it to William as evidence of Sarah's disruptive influence on hospital operations. "She's already accusing staff of misconduct," he reported, his concern perfectly calibrated. "This is exactly what we worried about, given her history here." The tension reached a breaking point when Emily suffered another crisis, requiring emergency intervention. The attending physician hesitated, looking for approval before proceeding with necessary but expensive treatments. Those crucial minutes of delay left Sarah standing in the hallway, watching helplessly as her daughter struggled to breathe, while medical staff waited for administrative clearance. That incident sparked quiet outrage among some staff members. A veteran nurse, risking Cooper's displeasure, went directly to William Harrison with her concerns about the pattern of delays in Emily's care. Others began documenting the suspicious timing of equipment failures and medication shortages. William found himself increasingly caught between his trust in Cooper's management and his growing unease about the situation. The hospital he'd worked so hard to build seemed to be revealing a darker side, one he'd either never noticed or chosen to ignore. The efficient system he'd prided himself on now appeared cold and potentially cruel when viewed through the lens of Sarah and Emily's struggle. As the conflicts escalated, none of the participants realized they were setting the stage for much larger revelations. Emily's case was becoming the catalyst that would expose not just past injustices but present corruption. The hospital's carefully maintained facade was beginning to crack, revealing the rot that had grown beneath its pristine surface. As this heartbreaking story unfolds, we invite you to join our community by subscribing to this channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these meaningful stories that reflect life's most profound moments. Together, we can explore more touching narratives that matter. The revelation came in the most unexpected way. William was reviewing Emily's medical history late one night, trying to understand the patterns of delayed treatment, when he discovered a decade-old file had been attached to her records. His tired eyes skimmed the document until a date stopped him cold: the night his son Tommy had nearly died. The emergency room report from that night was familiar. He'd read it countless times over the years. But now, reading it alongside Emily's current file, details he'd overlooked suddenly stood out. The nurse who had saved Tommy's life, the one who had spotted the medication interaction that would have killed him, was identified only as S. Miller in the hastily scribbled notes. William's hands began to shake as he pulled up Sarah Miller's old employee file. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The dedicated nurse who had worked a double shift to save his son was the same woman now sleeping in a chair beside her dying daughter's bed. The same woman who had been terminated months later for alleged negligence. The full weight of the connection hit him like a physical blow. He remembered that night clearly how he'd meant to thank the nurse who saved Tommy, but had been too overwhelmed with relief to follow through. He'd written a generous check to the hospital instead, never learning her name. That same year, he'd signed off on her termination without questioning the evidence presented. Digging deeper into the records, William noticed discrepancies he'd missed before. The timing of Sarah's dismissal coincided with her scheduled appearance before the board meeting he now recalled had been about suspected financial irregularities. The evidence against her had seemed conclusive at the time, but looking at it now, he saw holes in the documentation. Security footage from that period had conveniently malfunctioned. Witness statements contained identical phrases as if copied from a template. The medication error that led to her dismissal had occurred during the exact hours she was documented, helping save Tommy's life in another ward. The contradictions were glaring once he began looking for them. His computer screen cast a harsh glow across his office as he continued searching through old records. Each new discovery felt like another weight on his conscience. Sarah had been systematically erased from the hospital's history, her years of commendations buried, her personnel file sanitized, her contributions minimized. A knock at his office door startled him. The night nurse entered with updated charts on Emily's condition. "Mr. Harrison," she hesitated. "There's something you should know. I worked with Sarah back then. What happened to her? It wasn't right. Many of us knew it, but we were afraid to speak up." The nurse's words confirmed his growing suspicions. He dismissed her with a nod, then sat in the darkness of his office, confronting uncomfortable truths. He had built this hospital into a prestigious institution, but at what cost? How many other injustices had he overlooked in the name of efficiency and profit? Dawn was breaking when William finally left his office, the weight of his discovery evident in his tired steps. He found himself walking to the oncology ward, where Sarah dozed fitfully beside Emily's bed. In sleep, the years of hardship showed clearly on her face, years he had inadvertently helped create. Emily stirred in her sleep, prompting Sarah to immediately wake and check her daughter's vitals with practiced ease. The tenderness of the gesture struck William hard. This woman had saved his son, had tried to save the hospital's integrity, and her reward had been disgrace and poverty. Yet here she was, still caring, still fighting, still healing. The irony was almost too much to bear. His hospital, dedicated to saving lives, had nearly destroyed two Sarahs and now potentially Emily's. The systematic delays in Emily's treatment took on a more sinister aspect in light of these revelations. This wasn't just bureaucratic inefficiency, it felt like deliberate obstruction. As he watched Sarah adjust Emily's blankets with gentle precision, William made a silent vow. He would uncover the full truth, no matter the cost to himself or his hospital's reputation. He owed her that much, not just for saving Tommy, but for failing to protect her when she had tried to protect his hospital's integrity. But as he turned to leave the ward, he didn't notice Dr. Cooper watching from the shadows, already formulating plans to protect the system he had so carefully corrupted. The battle lines were being drawn, though William didn't yet realize just how deep the corruption ran, or how high the cost of exposing it would be. Emily's condition deteriorated with frightening speed over the next 48 hours. The delays in her treatment had allowed the cancer to gain ground, and her body was weakening under its relentless assault. The monitors beside her bed told a story of declining vital signs and failing responses, each beep a countdown neither mother nor daughter dared acknowledge. Dr. Cooper's interference became more overt as William's interest in the case increased. Scheduled treatments were cancelled due to administrative reviews. Critical medications were listed as pending approval. Each delay was documented with meticulous care, covered by perfectly reasonable explanations that nonetheless formed a pattern of deliberate obstruction. Sarah recognized the strategy at work. She'd seen it before during her nursing days. Patients without financial resources would face delay after delay until they either gave up or their conditions forced them to seek care elsewhere. But Emily was too sick to transfer, and Sarah too determined to give up. The hospital had become their battlefield, with Emily's life as the stakes. The oncology staff found themselves caught in an increasingly tense situation. Those who wanted to help Emily faced subtle threats to their careers. Equipment mysteriously malfunctioned during their shifts. Schedules were rearranged to keep sympathetic nurses away from Emily's case. The message was clear: helping the Millers carried a price. Despite these obstacles, a small resistance movement began to form. An elderly nurse slipped Sarah information about medication schedules. A young resident stayed late to monitor Emily's condition off the record. A pharmacy technician documented the strange patterns in medication availability, small acts of defiance against a system they were beginning to question. The crisis peaked one morning when Emily suffered a severe reaction to her delayed treatment. Her immune system, weakened by the cancer and the sporadic care, began attacking her own body. Sarah found herself performing CPR on her daughter while waiting for the emergency team to arrive, her professional training warring with her maternal terror. William arrived during the chaos. Witnessing firsthand the consequences of his hospital's administrative procedures, he watched Sarah work alongside the medical team, her movements precise despite her fear, saving her daughter's life even as the system he'd built tried to fail them both. The sight shook him to his core. In the aftermath, as Emily lay stabilized but weakened further, the first public confrontation between the old guard and the emerging resistance occurred. A veteran nurse, having witnessed Emily's near-death experience, openly challenged Dr. Cooper's treatment decisions during rounds. The resulting argument attracted attention from other staff members, spreading whispers of dissent throughout the hospital. The community around Harrison Memorial began to take notice. Local news outlets picked up stories about delayed treatments and suspicious patterns of care. Former patients came forward with similar experiences. The hospital's pristine reputation began showing cracks, and board members started asking uncomfortable questions about patient care statistics. Sarah, exhausted but resolute, continued her vigil by Emily's bedside. She maintained a detailed log of every delayed treatment, every suspicious equipment failure, every questionable administrative decision. Her years of nursing experience helped her document patterns that others might miss, building a case that would become crucial in the coming storm. Emily, despite her weakened state, remained the emotional center of the growing conflict. Her grace under suffering, her concern for her mother's well-being even as she fought for her own life, touched everyone who came into contact with her. She became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong with Harrison Memorial and everything it could still be. William found himself spending more time in the oncology ward, watching the daily drama unfold. He saw how the staff divided themselves, those who followed Cooper's unspoken directives and those who quietly rebelled. He noticed how Emily's room became a gathering point for those who remembered the hospital's original mission of healing and compassion. The tension in the hospital reached a breaking point when an anonymous source leaked Emily's treatment records to a local medical ethics board. The pattern of delays and obstruction, laid out in clinical detail, sparked an official investigation. Dr. Cooper's carefully constructed system of control began showing signs of strain. Yet even as the crisis escalated, something unexpected emerged. The very public battle over Emily's care had awakened something in the hospital staff, a remembrance of why they had chosen careers in medicine. a recognition of how far they had strayed from their calling. Small acts of resistance became more frequent, more open. Emily's room became a sort of unofficial command center for this quiet rebellion. The nurses who remembered Sarah from her earlier days brought their concerns there. Young doctors seeking guidance found their way to her. Even some board members, troubled by what they were learning, began making discreet inquiries through intermediaries. The hospital stood at a crossroads, though few recognized it yet. The crisis that had begun with one desperate mother and her dying daughter was about to expose decades of corruption and force everyone involved to choose sides in the coming conflict. The question was no longer if the truth would come out, but who would survive when it did. The weight of revelation struck William Harrison like a physical blow during a late-night walk through his hospital's corridors. The familiar halls, once a source of pride, now felt like a maze of betrayal and missed opportunities. Each step brought new understanding of how completely he had failed his own vision for Harrison Memorial. His awakening began with a simple file, a decade-old complaint about medication pricing that he dismissed as routine bureaucracy. Now, reading it again in his office at midnight, he saw it with new eyes. The numbers didn't just show pricing discrepancies, they revealed a systematic pattern of fraud. The same pattern Sarah Miller had tried to expose 10 years ago. The evidence mounted as he dug deeper into the hospital's records. Medication inventories that didn't match billing records. Insurance claims for procedures that differed from actual treatments given. Patient transfer patterns that correlated suspiciously with financial status. Each discovery was like another crack in the foundation of everything he believed about his hospital. More disturbing were the personnel records. Staff members who questioned practices disappeared from the payroll with suspicious regularity. Promising careers ended abruptly after raising concerns. Sarah Miller's case wasn't unique, she was just the most visible victim of a system designed to protect itself at any cost. The turning point came during a midnight visit to Emily's room. He found Sarah asleep in the uncomfortable chair beside her daughter's bed, still wearing her cleaning uniform from her second job. The sight of her, the woman who had saved his son, reduced to begging for her own daughter's life, crystallized everything that had gone wrong with his hospital. William spent the rest of the night in his office, reviewing financial records with growing horror. The corruption wasn't just in the medical practices, it had infected every aspect of hospital operations. Equipment purchases, supplier contracts, staff hiring, all had been twisted to serve a hidden network of profit and power. His own complicity became impossible to ignore. How many board meetings had he chaired where the numbers seemed too good to be true? How many times had he accepted Cooper's smooth explanations without questioning deeper? His pursuit of efficiency and profit had blinded him to the human cost of his decisions. The discovery of his son Tommy's altered medical records from that crucial night a decade ago was the final piece. Someone had attempted to erase Sarah Miller's role in saving his son's life, likely knowing it could have protected her during her later persecution. The deliberate nature of the alteration suggested a level of calculation that chilled him. Dawn found him still at his desk, surrounded by evidence of corruption he could no longer ignore. The prestigious hospital he'd built had become a facade hiding systematic exploitation of the vulnerable. His life's work, intended to help others, had instead become an instrument of suffering. William's transformation from administrator to activist began that morning. He started secretly documenting everything he discovered, creating backup copies of incriminating records. He began paying attention to the whispered conversations among staff, noting which employees seemed afraid and which ones wielded uncomfortable amounts of influence. The process was painful. Each new discovery forced him to confront his own role in creating this system. He had to acknowledge that his hands-off management style had allowed corruption to flourish. His focus on bottom-line results had created the perfect environment for exploitation. His behavior began to change, subtly at first. He started making unexpected rounds in different departments, asking questions he'd never bothered with before. He paid attention to the small signs of fear or resistance among his staff. He watched Dr. Cooper with new eyes, noting how the man's carefully crafted explanations always deflected responsibility. The most difficult realization was understanding how many people had tried to warn him over the years. How many employees had come to his office with concerns, only to be redirected to proper channels that ensured their complaints would never see action. How many Sarah Millers had he failed? His growing awareness came with a price. He noticed Cooper's people watching him more closely. Administrative assistants began accidentally scheduling conflicts for important meetings. Key documents became suddenly difficult to access. The system he'd unknowingly helped create was now treating him as a potential threat. But William couldn't go back to his former ignorance. Emily's deteriorating condition and Sarah's quiet dignity served as constant reminders of what was at stake. He began making discreet contacts with trusted board members, testing the waters for potential allies in the coming conflict. The final step in William's awakening came when he realized the full scope of what he had to do. Exposing the corruption wouldn't just mean confronting Dr. Cooper, it would mean dismantling much of what he'd built over the past 2 decades. The prestigious hospital he'd created would likely not survive the revelation of its sins intact. Yet as he watched Sarah tend to her daughter with unwavering dedication, he knew he had no choice. The time had come to destroy what he had built in order to restore what it should have been all along. The question was whether he could find the strength to see it through before it was too late for Emily and for his hospital's soul. William Harrison's investigation into his hospital's corruption began like a game of chess, each move carefully calculated to avoid alerting his opponents. He started by requesting routine audits of departments seemingly unrelated to Emily's case, using his authority as chairman to access records that had long been buried in administrative limbo. The first breakthrough came from the pharmacy records. Years of inventory reports revealed a pattern of high-end medications being billed to insurance companies, while cheaper alternatives were actually administered to patients. The difference in cost had been skillfully hidden through a complex web of accounting tricks, but once he knew what to look for, the fraud was unmistakable. Working late into the night, William discovered Dr. Cooper's network extended far beyond simple medication fraud. Equipment purchases had been inflated, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, and charitable donations diverted through shell companies. The prestigious Cancer Research Center, supposedly funded by grateful patients, was actually a sophisticated money laundering operation. Sarah Miller's old reports began making terrible sense. The medication discrepancies she'd noticed were just the tip of the iceberg. Her attempt to expose the truth had threatened an entire criminal enterprise, making her removal not just convenient but necessary. The realization of how thoroughly she'd been betrayed made William physically ill. The scope of corruption proved staggering. Patient records had been systematically altered to justify expensive treatments that were never provided. Insurance companies were billed for phantom consultations. Even the hospital's acclaimed clinical trials program showed signs of data manipulation to ensure continued funding. As William dug deeper, allies emerged from unexpected quarters. A young accountant in the billing department secretly provided documentation of suspicious payment patterns. A veteran nurse offered testimony about forced transfers of patients who asked too many questions. A maintenance worker revealed hidden cameras in Cooper's office installed during a suspicious renovation project. The human cost of the corruption became increasingly clear. Files revealed dozens of cases like Sarah's dedicated healthcare workers who had been systematically destroyed for threatening to expose the truth. Some had been fired, others pressured to resign. A few had faced manufactured malpractice charges, their careers and reputations ruined. William's investigation took an unexpected turn when he discovered links between Cooper and several board members. Regular payments, disguised as investment returns, had ensured their cooperation in maintaining the corrupt system. The web of complicity reached into the highest levels of hospital administration. The evidence-gathering process became increasingly dangerous. William noticed he was being followed between his car and his office. His private phone began showing signs of tampering. Anonymous warnings appeared on his desk, disguised as routine memos. The message was clear someone knew what he was doing and wanted him to stop. Sarah, still maintaining her vigil by Emily's bedside, became an unexpected resource. Her years of nursing experience helped identify patterns in the medical records that others might have missed. She could recall specific incidents that corresponded to suspicious entries in the financial documents, providing crucial context for the investigation. Emily's room became a secure meeting place for sharing information. Who would suspect conspirators in a dying girl's hospital room? The irony wasn't lost on William. The very tragedy Cooper had tried to use to silence questioning had become the perfect cover for exposing his crimes. The investigation gained momentum when William located former employees who had been forced out over the years. Each had a piece of the puzzle, a story of corruption observed and resistance punished. Together, their testimonies painted a picture of systematic abuse of power spanning more than a decade. A crucial breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Cooper's former secretary, now working at another hospital. She had maintained copies of correspondence that implicated not just Cooper, but an entire network of corrupt administrators across multiple healthcare facilities. The scandal, it seemed, extended far beyond Harrison Memorial's walls. William's own complicity haunted him as the investigation proceeded. How many times had he signed off on decisions that enabled this corruption? How many lives had been affected by his willful blindness? Each new discovery was both a step toward justice and a reminder of his own failure as a leader. The tension within the hospital became palpable as the investigation continued. Staff members chose sides, often without knowing exactly what was happening. Cooper's allies became more aggressive in their obstruction of Emily's care, while those supporting the investigation found ways to help despite the risks. As the evidence mounted, William faced a devastating choice. A full exposure of the corruption would likely destroy the hospital's reputation, possibly leading to its closure. The same institution that had saved countless lives, including his sons, might not survive the revelation of its sins. Yet allowing the corruption to continue would make him as guilty as those who had created it. Throughout the investigation, Emily's condition remained a constant reminder of what was at stake. Each delayed treatment, each lost test result, demonstrated the real human cost of the hospital's corrupt system. Her quiet courage in the face of these challenges strengthened William's resolve to see the investigation through, regardless of the personal cost. The final piece fell into place when William discovered records of offshore accounts linked to hospital executives. The amounts involved were staggering: millions of dollars diverted from patient care into private pockets. The evidence was irrefutable, but using it would change everything. There would be no going back once he took the next step. William Harrison, who had spent his life building Harrison Memorial into a prestigious institution, now faced the prospect of being the one to expose its darkest secrets. The question was no longer whether to act, but how to ensure the truth would come out in a way that might save the hospital's soul, if not its reputation. The truth began to spread through the hospital community like ripples in a still pond. First it was whispers among the cleaning staff who had witnessed suspicious late-night meetings. Then came the hushed conversations between nurses who had noticed patterns in patient transfers. Soon, a groundswell of suppressed grievances and unspoken suspicions began to surface. Maria Rodriguez, who cleaned the oncology ward at night, was the first to openly show support for Sarah and Emily. She brought them home-cooked meals and stayed past her shift to provide company. Her simple act of kindness inspired others. Soon, a network of support staff began finding ways to help, sharing information about scheduled treatments and medication deliveries. The hospital's lower-income patients, many of whom had faced similar barriers to care, recognized their own struggles in Emily's story. They began sharing their experiences: delayed treatments, mysterious billing increases, denied assistance applications. Each individual story seemed minor, but together they formed a damning pattern of systematic discrimination. Former patients started appearing in the hospital lobby, quietly holding signs demanding justice for Emily. Local community organizers picked up the story, connecting it to broader issues of healthcare inequality. Social media buzzed with accounts of similar experiences at Harrison Memorial, creating a virtual support network that grew by the hour. Sarah's former colleagues from her nursing days began coming forward, despite risks to their careers. They shared stories of her dedication, her attention to detail, and her unwavering commitment to patient care. More importantly, they confirmed her original suspicions about medication fraud, adding credibility to the growing scandal. The hospital's maintenance staff, often invisible to administrators but witness to everything, became crucial allies. They knew which security cameras had been mysteriously redirected, which offices were accessed after hours, which documents disappeared from supposedly secure storage. Their quiet observations provided vital pieces to the puzzle. Local religious leaders joined the cause, organizing prayer vigils outside the hospital. These peaceful gatherings drew media attention, forcing the hospital board to acknowledge the growing controversy. The sight of hundreds of candles flickering in the darkness became a powerful symbol of community solidarity. Emily's former high school classmates organized fundraisers and social media campaigns. They shared photos of her dreaming of becoming a nurse like her mother, contrasting her aspirations with her current struggle. Their youthful activism brought fresh energy to the movement, attracting attention from younger generations. The hospital's junior staff found subtle ways to resist. Residents delayed paperwork that would obstruct Emily's care. Lab technicians prioritized her tests, despite orders to the contrary. Pharmacy assistants documented suspicious medication substitutions. Small acts of defiance accumulated into significant support. Local business owners near the hospital began offering help. The cafe across the street provided free meals to supporters. A nearby hotel offered discounted rooms to Sarah so she could stay close to Emily. Small shops displayed signs supporting healthcare reform. The community's economic power began aligning against the hospital's administration. Medical students from nearby universities started investigating similar cases at other hospitals. They discovered patterns suggesting the corruption extended beyond Harrison Memorial, pointing to a larger systemic problem. Their academic approach lent credibility to the growing body of evidence. Former hospital employees who had been forced out over the years found each other through social media. They formed a support group that quickly evolved into an advocacy organization. Their combined experiences painted a devastating picture of long-term institutional corruption. The local press, initially hesitant to challenge the prestigious hospital, began publishing investigative pieces. Reporters uncovered links between hospital administrators and pharmaceutical companies. All financial journalists traced suspicious patterns in the hospital's charitable foundation. The story grew beyond just Emily's case. Healthcare advocacy groups recognized the potential impact of the case. They provided legal resources and media expertise, helping to shape the narrative. What had started as one family's tragedy became a rallying point for broader healthcare reform. Community leaders who had previously supported the hospital began asking uncomfortable questions. Donors reconsidered their contributions. Local politicians, sensing the shifting public mood, called for investigations. The hospital's carefully maintained network of influence showed signs of cracking. Emily's story resonated particularly strongly with immigrant communities who had faced similar healthcare barriers. Their stories added a crucial dimension to the growing narrative, highlighting how systematic discrimination affected vulnerable populations. The hospital's housekeeping staff, who had witnessed years of late-night document shredding and suspicious meetings, began keeping detailed records of unusual activities. Their observations, though seemingly minor, helped establish patterns of suspicious behavior. Medical supply companies' employees anonymously reported pricing irregularities and kickback schemes. Their inside knowledge provided crucial evidence of systematic fraud, supporting Williams' investigation with concrete documentation. As the community involvement grew, Dr. Cooper's ability to control the narrative diminished. Each new voice added credibility to the allegations. Each shared story made it harder to dismiss the pattern of corruption as isolated incidents. The movement's strength lay in its diversity, from high-powered lawyers offering pro bono services to custodians sharing vital information, from social media activists to religious leaders, from current employees risking their jobs to former patients sharing their experiences. Together, they created a force that even the powerful hospital administration couldn't ignore. This grassroots uprising transformed what might have been an isolated case into a symbol of resistance against healthcare inequality. The community's involvement ensured that the truth, once exposed, couldn't be easily buried again. The hospital administration found itself facing not just one determined mother, but an entire mobilized community demanding change. As the investigation deepened and community support grew, profound changes began taking place within the key players of this unfolding drama. William Harrison, once a titan of corporate healthcare, found himself rediscovering the idealism that had first drawn him to hospital administration. His polished boardroom demeanor gave way to a more authentic presence as he spent increasing time in the patient wards, especially near Emily's room. Sarah Miller's transformation was more subtle but equally significant. The bitterness she'd carried for a decade began to dissolve in the face of unexpected support. Each small act of kindness from hospital staff or community members helped restore her faith in humanity. The fighting spirit that had made her an exceptional nurse reawakened, now tempered with hard-earned wisdom. Dr. Cooper's carefully maintained facade had showing cracks. His legendary composure slipped during board meetings, revealing flashes of desperation. Longtime colleagues noticed his hands trembling when signing documents, his eyes darting nervously during conversations. The weight of his decades-long deception began manifesting in physical symptoms he couldn't hide. Emily, despite her weakening condition, emerged as an unexpected source of strength for those around her. Her unfailing grace and optimism in the face of both illness and injustice touched everyone who entered her room. She transformed from a simple patient into a symbol of everything that needed to change in the healthcare system. The hospital staff underwent their own collective transformation. The culture of fear and silence that had dominated for years began crumbling. Junior doctors found their voices, questioning orders that didn't serve patients' best interests. Nurses started documenting discrepancies they'd previously ignored. A new atmosphere of professional courage emerged. Even the hospital itself seemed to be transforming. The sterile corridors took on a different character as more community members filled them with purpose and hope. Meeting rooms once reserved for budget discussions now hosted strategy sessions for reform. The institution's soul, long suppressed under corporate efficiency, showed signs of reawakening. William's personal journey proved particularly profound. Each night after leaving Emily's room, he found himself drawn to the hospital chapel. There, in the quiet hours, he confronted the full weight of his complicity in creating a system that valued profit over human life. These solitary vigils gradually transformed his grief into determination. The transformation extended to the broader medical community. Doctors from other hospitals began reaching out, sharing similar stories of corruption they'd witnessed. Medical students who rotated through Harrison Memorial carried the story to their institutions. A broader conversation about healthcare ethics and reform took root. For Sarah, the most significant change came in how she saw herself. After years of doubting her own worth, of believing the lies told about her competence, she rediscovered her identity as a healer. The respect shown by younger staff members, who sought her advice despite her unofficial status, helped restore her professional confidence. Emily's room became a catalyst for unexpected connections. Administrators found themselves in conversations with cleaning staff. Doctors shared coffee with patient families. The artificial hierarchies that had divided the hospital community began dissolving in the face of their shared humanity. Dr. Cooper's transformation took a darker turn. As pressure mounted, his legendary charm curdled into barely concealed hostility. Long-buried paranoia surfaced in his interactions. Those who had known him for years were shocked by the emergence of his true nature, like a mask slowly slipping to reveal what lay beneath. The hospital board members experienced their own evolution. Many had been passive participants in the corruption, choosing ignorance over accountability. Now forced to confront the consequences of their negligence, some found the courage to speak up, while others retreated into desperate self-justification. William's relationship with his own son, Tommy, deepened through this period. Their conversations about that long-ago night when Sarah saved his life led to deeper discussions about privilege, responsibility, and the true meaning of healing. Tommy's perspective helped his father see the situation with fresh eyes. The transformation of the hospital's youngest staff members proved particularly powerful. Medical residents, who had entered their careers full of idealism only to be taught cynicism, rediscovered their original calling. Their collective awakening brought fresh energy to the movement for change. Throughout these changes, Emily's condition remained a constant reminder of what was at stake. Her quiet courage in the face of both illness and injustice inspired those around her to be their best selves. She transformed from a victim of the system into a catalyst for its reformation. As these personal transformations unfolded, the hospital itself stood at a crossroads. The institution that had prided itself on world-class medical care, while harboring systemic corruption, faced its own metamorphosis. The question was no longer whether change would come, but what would emerge from this period of upheaval. The power of these individual transformations lay in their authenticity. Each person involved, from the highest administrator to the newest volunteer, found themselves confronting fundamental questions about their role in the healthcare system. The answers they found would reshape not just their own lives, but the future of Harrison Memorial itself. This period of transformation marked a point of no return. Like a patient fighting through a fever, the hospital and its people would emerge forever changed. Whether that change would lead to healing or destruction remained to be seen, but no one involved could return to who they had been before Emily's case began unfolding. The storm broke on a rain-lashed Tuesday morning when Emily's condition suddenly deteriorated, just as William Harrison prepared to present his evidence of corruption to a select group of board members. The timing couldn't have been worse or perhaps more revealing of the hospital's true nature. Emily's vital signs crashed during what should have been a routine treatment. Sarah's desperate calls for help went unanswered for crucial minutes as staff members loyal to Cooper mysteriously disappeared from their posts. The few nurses who responded found essential emergency equipment mysteriously out for maintenance. Simultaneously, in the hospital's executive wing, William faced his own crisis. Minutes before his scheduled presentation, the digital files containing months of carefully gathered evidence vanished from the secure server. Backup drives were found damaged, paper documents disappeared from locked cabinets, and key witnesses suddenly became unreachable. The hospital erupted into chaos as these crises collided. Emergency alarms from Emily's room echoed through the corridors while security personnel, acting on anonymous tips, began searching the offices of staff members who had supported the investigation. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. This was Cooper's counterattack. Sarah, drawing on years of nursing experience, managed to stabilize Emily using improvised solutions and sheer determination. Her actions, witnessed by several medical students, demonstrated both her competence and the criminal negligence of the system working against her. Each moment of that emergency response further exposed the hospital's moral bankruptcy. In the boardroom, William refused to be silenced by the loss of his digital evidence. Instead, he began sharing the story of Emily's current crisis in real time, forcing board members to confront the immediate consequences of their complicity. The sound of emergency alarms provided a chilling soundtrack to his testimony. Cooper made his appearance at this crucial moment, arriving in the boardroom with a team of lawyers. They carried documents alleging financial irregularities in William's own dealings with the hospital. The threat was clear: back down or face destruction. The chairman of the board called for an immediate executive session. Meanwhile, news of Emily's crisis spread through the hospital's unofficial networks. Off-duty staff began arriving voluntarily, offering support and bearing witness. Community members who had been holding vigil outside the hospital pushed past security to fill the corridors. The hospital's carefully maintained facade of control began crumbling. Local media, tipped off by anonymous sources, arrived to find a hospital in turmoil. Cameras captured the contrast between the executive wing, where security guards protected closed doors, and the oncology ward, where medical professionals worked desperately to save a young girl's life without proper resources. William, watching the chaos unfold on multiple screens in the boardroom, made a decision that would change everything. He pulled out his personal phone and began a live stream, broadcasting the board meeting in real time. "If transparency will destroy us," he declared, "then we deserve to be destroyed." Cooper's reaction was immediate and violent. He lunged for the phone, creating a scene that would be shared millions of times on social media. The composed hospital administrator transformed into a desperate man before dozens of witnesses, revealing the truth that lay beneath years of careful deception. In Emily's room, the crisis reached its peak as her heart stopped beating. Sarah, running on instinct and adrenaline, began CPR while calling out instructions to the volunteers around her. The absence of proper emergency response teams became damning evidence of the hospital's broken systems. The hospital's more principled board members, watching these events unfold, finally found their voices. Years of quiet acquiescence gave way to demands for immediate action. The chairman's attempts to maintain order failed as decades of suppressed conscience burst into the open. Outside the hospital, the gathering crowd grew larger and more vocal. Community leaders arrived, followed by local politicians sensing a pivotal moment. The hospital's phones began ringing with calls from national media outlets. What had been a local scandal was exploding into a national story. Through it all, Emily's monitors continued their ominous rhythm, marking each precious heartbeat as Sarah and her improvised team fought to keep her alive. The girl who had become a symbol of the hospital's moral crisis now literally fought for survival, her struggle broadcast to the world. State health inspectors, already investigating complaints about the hospital, arrived to find an institution in meltdown. They began documenting everything, their presence adding another layer of official scrutiny to the unfolding drama. Cooper's carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time. In a final, desperate move, Cooper attempted to order a complete shutdown of the hospital's computer systems, claiming a security breach. Its staff, long aware of the corruption they had been forced to enable, refused the order. Instead, they began securing evidence of years of digital manipulation. William, still broadcasting, laid out the full scope of the corruption while Emily's crisis continued in the background. The juxtaposition of corporate greed and human suffering, captured in real time, created a narrative that no amount of public relations could counter. The convergence of these crises, medical, ethical, and administrative, transformed Harrison Memorial from a prestigious institution into ground zero for a national debate about healthcare corruption. Every minute brought new revelations, new witnesses, new evidence of systemic failure. As morning turned to afternoon, the hospital became a battleground between two visions of healthcare, one based on profit and power, the other on healing and humanity. The outcome would determine not just Emily's fate, but the future of medicine in their community. The emotional crescendo at Harrison Memorial reached its peak in a series of powerful confrontations that would forever change everyone involved. The most devastating moment came when Sarah, exhausted from hours of fighting to keep Emily stable, finally faced Dr. Cooper in the hospital corridor outside her daughter's room. "You tried to destroy me once," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 10 years of injustice. "Now you're trying to kill my daughter." The corridor fell silent as staff members, patients and visitors stopped to witness this long overdue confrontation. Cooper's usual smooth demeanor cracked as he faced the human consequence of his actions. William arrived at that moment, still broadcasting live from his phone. The timing was perfect, perhaps too perfect, as Sarah began methodically listing every delayed treatment, every missing medication, every suspicious equipment failure that had threatened Emily's life. Her voice, trained through years of nursing to remain calm in crisis, made the accusations even more damning. The hospital's long-serving staff members began gathering, drawn by the confrontation but staying for the truth. Many had worked with Sarah during her nursing days, had witnessed her dedication, had known about but never spoken up against her unjust termination. Their silent presence became a powerful testimony. Emily, conscious but barely able to speak, managed to capture everyone's attention with a whispered question that cut through the tension. "Mom, why does he hate us so much?" The simple inquiry, voiced with genuine curiosity rather than anger, struck Cooper harder than any accusation could have. Tears began flowing freely among the witnesses as Sarah struggled to answer her daughter's question. The raw emotion of a mother trying to explain human cruelty to her dying child created a moment of unbearable truth. Even some of Cooper's most loyal supporters found themselves looking away in shame. William, his own composure cracking, stepped forward to address Emily directly. "He doesn't hate you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He hates what you represent, the truth that healthcare should be about healing, not profit." The moment was captured on dozens of phones, instantly becoming a symbol of the larger struggle. The emotional temperature rose further when veteran nurse Mary Chen, who had worked at Harrison Memorial for 30 years, stepped forward to publicly confess her role in maintaining the corrupt system. Her breakdown as she detailed years of following orders she knew were wrong triggered a cascade of similar confessions from other staff members. Cooper, watching his carefully constructed empire crumble, attempted one final act of manipulation. He began speaking about his own humble beginnings, his desire to make the hospital great, his vision for excellence. But his words rang hollow against the backdrop of Emily's labored breathing and the visible evidence of his system's human cost. Sarah's response was devastating in its simplicity. She invited Cooper into Emily's room to witness firsthand the consequences of his actions. "Come see what excellence looks like," she challenged, gesturing to the makeshift equipment and improvised solutions they'd been forced to use. "Come see your legacy." The tension reached new heights when several board members arrived, drawn by the commotion and William's ongoing broadcast. They found themselves face to face with the human cost of their oversight failures. The contrast between their expensive suits and Emily's worn hospital gown spoke volumes about the system's priorities. Emily, showing strength that amazed everyone present, managed to sit up slightly in her bed. "I still want to be a nurse," she announced to the room, her voice weak but determined. "I want to help fix what's broken." The simple declaration of hope in the face of such corruption left many in tears. The emotional impact multiplied as hospital staff began sharing their own stories of moral compromise and suppressed conscience. Years of forced complicity in a corrupt system had taken a toll on their professional pride and personal integrity. The dam of silence finally broke, releasing a flood of long-buried guilt and regret. William, still broadcasting, made perhaps the most powerful statement of all. He knelt by Emily's bed and publicly apologized for his role in creating a system that valued profit over people. The sight of one of Boston's most powerful men humbling himself before a dying teenager crystallized the moral crisis facing modern healthcare. Sarah, watching this display of raw emotion and public confession, found her own anger transforming into something more complex. "We're all responsible," she said quietly, "but we're all capable of change." Her words offered a path forward through the chaos, a way to channel emotion into action. The community members who had been watching the broadcast began arriving at the hospital, bringing food, supplies, and support. The gathering crowd outside Emily's window began singing hymns of hope and healing. The emotional resonance of the moment transcended individual grievances to become a collective cry for change. Cooper, stripped of his power and facing the undeniable humanity of the moment, finally showed the first cracks in his facade. His hands began shaking uncontrollably as he watched his life's work unravel. The man who had maintained control through decades of corruption found himself undone by the simple truth of a dying girl's courage. The day's events reached their emotional climax when Emily suffered another crisis, and the entire gathered crowd witnessed Sarah and the hospital staff working together to save her. The seamless cooperation between former enemies, united by a higher purpose, demonstrated the potential for redemption and renewal. As evening fell, the emotional intensity transformed into a quiet determination. The raw feelings exposed during the day's confrontations had cleared the air like a thunderstorm, leaving behind a shared commitment to rebuild something better from the ashes of corruption. The cascade of revelations began when an anonymous worker, inspired by the day's events, released thousands of encrypted emails from Cooper's private server. The documents revealed a corruption network far more extensive and insidious than anyone had imagined, reaching into every corner of the healthcare system. The first bombshell came in the form of detailed records showing how Cooper had orchestrated Sarah's dismissal. Emails revealed a carefully planned campaign to discredit her, including fabricated evidence and coerced testimony. The documentation showed how thoroughly he had manipulated the system to silence a potential whistleblower. Even more shocking were the financial records showing systematic fraud in the hospital's drug procurement system. Patients had been charged for expensive medications while receiving cheaper alternatives, with the difference being funneled through a complex network of shell companies. The scheme had generated millions in illegal profits over the years. Williams' live broadcast captured the moment when board members first saw evidence of their own unwitting complicity. The complex web of financial transactions had been hidden behind legitimate-looking reports and professional presentations. Their horror at realizing how thoroughly they had been deceived was palpable. The revelation that hit hardest came from Cooper's personal files, a list of patients who had died because they couldn't afford proper treatment. Each case had been carefully documented and justified through seemingly legitimate medical reasons, but the pattern was clear: financial considerations had directly impacted treatment decisions. Cooper's network extended beyond Harrison Memorial. Documents revealed connections to pharmaceutical companies, insurance providers, and other hospitals, all participating in various schemes to maximize profit at the expense of patient care. The corruption had become institutionalized, treated as a normal part of healthcare business. Sarah's original concerns about medication fraud, documented in her reports from 10 years ago, were vindicated in spectacular fashion. The evidence showed not only that she had been right, but that her discoveries had merely scratched the surface of a much larger conspiracy. Perhaps the most damning revelations concerned the hospital's prestigious research program. Clinical trial data had been manipulated to secure funding and approval for expensive treatments. Patient outcomes had been selectively reported, hiding negative results that might have affected profits. The human cost became devastatingly clear as former employees began sharing their stories. Nurses testified about being forced to provide substandard care to save costs. Doctors described pressure to perform unnecessary procedures. Support staff revealed how they had been coerced into falsifying records. Emily's case proved to be the key that unlocked everything. Her treatment records, when compared with billing documents, provided a clear example of how the system worked to exploit vulnerable patients. The pattern of delayed treatments and denied medications matched perfectly with Cooper's profit optimization strategies. The revelation that shocked even hardened investigators came from Cooper's private correspondence about William's son Tommy. Cooper had known about Sarah's role in saving Tommy's life and had deliberately hidden this information, understanding its potential to protect her during her later persecution. Financial analysts, poring through the released documents, uncovered a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as the hospital's charitable foundation. Donations meant for patient care had been diverted into private accounts, while tax records were falsified to maintain the appearance of legitimate charitable work. The scope of the deception became clear when investigators discovered Cooper's network of informants throughout the hospital. Every department had staff members paid to report potential whistleblowers. This surveillance system had created an atmosphere of fear that prevented people from speaking up about wrongdoing. William's own investigation files, recovered from deleted server backups, provided crucial context for understanding how the corruption had evolved. His meticulous documentation showed how small compromises had grown into systematic exploitation, with each unchallenged ethical breach paving the way for larger ones. The most personal revelations came from Cooper's private notes about Sarah. His detailed plans for her destruction showed a level of calculated malice that shocked even his closest allies. The documents revealed how he had monitored her for years, ensuring she remained unable to rebuild her life. Community health records revealed the broader impact of the hospital's corrupt practices. Neighborhoods served by Harrison Memorial showed higher rates of untreated chronic conditions and poorer health outcomes. The data painted a clear picture of how profit-driven healthcare created systematic inequality. Medical students and residents came forward with their own revelations about how they had been gradually indoctrinated into the corrupt system. Their testimonies described a culture that normalized unethical behavior under the guise of practical necessity. The final revelation, perhaps the most powerful, came from Cooper himself. As the evidence mounted and his defenses crumbled, he finally broke down and confessed. His explanation of how he had justified each decision, each compromise, each betrayal provided a chilling insight into how corruption corrupts the corrupter. As night fell on Harrison Memorial, the full scope of revelations had transformed understanding of not just one hospital's corruption, but the deeper systemic issues in American healthcare. What had begun as one mother's fight for her daughter's life had exposed a crisis of conscience in modern medicine. The impact of these revelations would continue to ripple outward, touching every aspect of healthcare delivery and hospital administration. The question was no longer about if change would come, but how to rebuild a system that had been revealed as fundamentally broken. This story of a mother's unwavering love and sacrifice deserves a like, yet Sarah's courage remains unrecognized. Take a moment to show your appreciation by hitting the like button. It's the least we can do to honor such remarkable strength. The cruel twist of fate struck like lightning 3 days after the revelations broke. Dr. James Cooper's teenage daughter, Catherine, was rushed to Harrison Memorial's emergency room following a severe car accident. The same hospital whose resources he had corrupted, whose staff he had terrorized, now held his daughter's life in their hands. Catherine's injuries were catastrophic multiple trauma, internal bleeding, and severe head injuries. She needed immediate surgery, specialized medication, and intensive care, all resources that Cooper had systematically manipulated over the years. The irony was lost on no one as he stood in the emergency room, no longer the powerful administrator but a desperate father. The hospital staff faced an immediate moral crisis. Some suggested transferring Catherine to another facility, using the same bureaucratic obstacles Cooper had employed against countless other patients. Others remembered their oath to heal, regardless of the patient's identity. The tension in the emergency room was palpable as medical professionals struggled with their conscience. Sarah, still maintaining her vigil by Emily's bedside, heard the commotion. When she learned the identity of the new patient, she did something that shocked everyone she offered to help. Drawing on her years of trauma nursing experience, she provided crucial information about Catherine's blood type and medical history, details she remembered from her time at the hospital. Cooper's transformation was immediate and devastating. His carefully constructed facade of professional detachment shattered completely as he watched his daughter fight for life. The man who had coldly denied care to countless patients now found himself begging the same people he had wronged to save his child. The situation became even more complex when it was discovered that the specialized medication Catherine needed was one of the items Cooper had manipulated in his pricing schemes. The hospital's supply had been diluted and mismanaged under his own policies. His daughter's life now hung in the balance of the very system he had corrupted. William Harrison, watching this unfold, saw an opportunity not for revenge but for redemption. He immediately authorized full access to all hospital resources for Catherine's care, demonstrating the standard of treatment that should have been available to all patients. His decision challenged the staff to rise above personal grievances. The surgical team that assembled for Catherine included doctors and nurses who had suffered under Cooper's administration. Yet they worked with unwavering dedication, showing the true spirit of medical professionals. Their commitment to saving his daughter, despite their history with him, became a powerful testament to their integrity. As Catherine's surgery progressed, Cooper experienced firsthand the anxiety of waiting without information, the helplessness of being unable to influence outcomes with money or power. He sat in the same uncomfortable chairs where countless families had waited while he had denied them care, facing the same uncertainty he had inflicted on others. The parallel between Catherine and Emily's situations became impossible to ignore. Both teenagers, both fighting for their lives, both dependent on a system that their fathers had influenced in vastly different ways. The two girls' rooms were just doors apart in the ICU, their monitors beeping in unintentional synchronization. In a moment of complete vulnerability, Cooper found himself outside Emily's room, watching Sarah tend to her daughter with the same care he hoped others were showing Catherine. The weight of his actions, the lives he had impacted, the families he had destroyed, it all came crashing down on him in that moment. The tragedy reached its peak when Catherine developed complications directly related to the diluted medications, a problem created by her father's own policies. The medical team struggled to compensate for the compromised supplies, working against the very systems Cooper had put in place. Sarah's expertise proved crucial during a critical moment in Catherine's care. Her knowledge of the hospital's old emergency protocols helped the team navigate around the broken systems Cooper had created. The sight of his daughter's life being saved by someone he had tried to destroy broke something fundamental in Cooper's psyche. Through the long nights of Catherine's recovery, Cooper experienced every aspect of the broken healthcare system he had helped create. He felt the frustration of dealing with insurance paperwork, the anxiety of waiting for test results, the fear of each new complication. His daughter's survival now depended on the very people he had wronged. The ultimate tragedy lay not in Catherine's condition, which eventually stabilized, but in the realization that hundreds of other daughters, sons, mothers and fathers had faced similar crises without the resources now being devoted to Cooper's child. This understanding seemed to age him visibly, transforming him from a powerful administrator into a broken man confronting the consequences of his choices. The collapse of Harrison Memorial's corrupt system was as spectacular as it was devastating. In the wake of Cooper's personal crisis and the ongoing revelations, the carefully constructed facade began crumbling at an alarming rate. The first major blow came when the hospital's accreditation board announced an emergency review, freezing all non-essential operations. Insurance companies, sensing liability, began withdrawing coverage for certain procedures. The domino effect was immediate and catastrophic. Scheduled surgeries were cancelled, clinical trials suspended, and referrals diverted to other facilities. The prestigious hospital that had once been the crown jewel of Boston's medical community now faced a crisis of confidence. The financial impact hit like a tsunami. As investigators froze suspicious accounts, the hospital found itself unable to meet basic operational costs. Staff paychecks were delayed, suppliers demanded immediate payment, and critical maintenance was postponed. The physical infrastructure began showing signs of strain, mirroring the institutional breakdown. Long-standing patients, including those in the middle of critical treatment protocols, faced impossible choices. Many were forced to seek care elsewhere, their trust in Harrison Memorial shattered by the revelations of systematic fraud. The exodus of patients created a snowball effect, further destabilizing the hospital's already precarious financial situation. The human cost became painfully evident as dedicated medical professionals watched their life's work crumble. Surgeons with decades of experience found their reputations tainted by association. Nurses who had devoted their careers to the hospital faced uncertain futures. Support staff, many living paycheck to paycheck, confronted imminent unemployment. But media coverage turned increasingly hostile as new details emerged daily. Local news stations broadcast interviews with former patients who had suffered under the corrupt system. National outlets picked up the story, turning Harrison Memorial into a symbol of everything wrong with American healthcare. The hospital's name became synonymous with medical corruption. The breakdown of internal systems accelerated as key personnel began leaving. Department heads resigned rather than face investigation. Administrative staff, fearing legal consequences, abandoned their posts. The exodus of experienced employees created dangerous gaps in patient care protocols and safety procedures. William Harrison watched helplessly as the institution his family had built over generations imploded. Each new revelation, each departed employee, each cancelled procedure felt like a personal failure. The weight of responsibility for not recognizing and stopping the corruption sooner pressed down on him with crushing force. Emergency services, once the hospital's pride, struggled to maintain basic standards. Ambulances were redirected to other facilities. The emergency room, chronically understaffed, could only handle the most critical cases. The community's healthcare safety net began showing dangerous tears. The hospital board, facing potential legal liability, dissolved into chaos. Members resigned en masse, while others turned against each other in a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. The leadership vacuum further accelerated the institution's decline, leaving remaining staff without direction or support. Cooper's own daughter, Catherine, became a poignant symbol of the collapse. Her continued need for specialized care highlighted the human cost of the system's breakdown. The same corruption that had enriched her father now threatened her recovery, as necessary treatments became increasingly difficult to provide. Emily's condition also deteriorated as the hospital's resources dwindled. The specialized care she required became harder to maintain as equipment failed and supplies ran short. Sarah found herself fighting not just her daughter's illness, but also the collapsing infrastructure around them. The community's response to the crisis was mixed. While many celebrated the exposure of corruption, others mourned the loss of a vital healthcare resource. Local businesses that had depended on the hospital's employees saw sharp declines in revenue. But the economic ripples spread throughout the neighborhood. Medical students and residents, their training interrupted, faced uncertain futures. Many had invested years in programs that now might not be completed. The collapse threatened not just current healthcare delivery, but also the next generation of medical professionals. But as the system collapsed, even basic hospital functions became challenging. Record-keeping systems failed, appointments were lost, and medication inventories became unreliable. The sophisticated healthcare machine that had once operated with precision now sputtered and stalled. The tragedy peaked when several critically ill patients had to be evacuated due to failing infrastructure. The sight of ambulances transferring vulnerable patients to other facilities in the middle of the night became a powerful image of the institution's fall from grace. The collapse revealed the interconnected nature of modern healthcare. As Harrison Memorial faltered, other local hospitals struggled to absorb the patient load. The entire region's medical ecosystem showed signs of strain, demonstrating how one institution's failure could threaten an entire community's health. Through it all, the remaining staff struggled to maintain some semblance of care for those who couldn't be transferred. Their dedication in the face of systematic failure demonstrated both the best and worst of the healthcare system: individual excellence undermined by institutional corruption. The emotional devastation that followed Harrison Memorial's collapse affected everyone involved in ways both profound and unexpected. Staff members who had dedicated their careers to the hospital wandered the increasingly empty corridors like ghosts, their professional identities shattered by the institution's disgrace. Each closing department, each departing colleague deepened the collective trauma. For William Harrison, the weight of betrayal and failure manifested in visible physical decline. His hair turned noticeably grayer, deep lines etched themselves around his eyes, and his once commanding presence diminished. Sleepless nights spent reviewing years of missed warnings and ignored signs took their toll, aging him beyond his years. Sarah Miller's emotions proved more complex, vindication mixed with grief as she watched the institution that had both defined and destroyed her career crumble. The sight of former colleagues who had turned their backs on her now facing their own professional crises brought no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for all that had been lost. Emily's response to the chaos around her showed wisdom beyond her years. Despite her weakening condition, she became a source of comfort for the nurses and doctors who continued to care for her. Her quiet strength in the face of both personal and institutional crisis touched everyone who entered her room. Cooper's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. The formerly powerful administrator became a hollow shell of himself, spending hours sitting silently beside his daughter's bed. The parallel between Catherine's fight for survival and the consequences of his actions seemed to break something fundamental in his psyche. The younger staff members struggled with disillusionment. Medical residents who had begun their careers full of idealism now questioned everything they had been taught. The revelation that their mentors had been complicit in systematic corruption shook their faith in the entire medical profession. Long-term patients felt particularly betrayed. Many had developed deep relationships with their caregivers, trusting the hospital with their most vulnerable moments. Learning that this trust had been systematically abused created emotional wounds that no medical procedure could heal. The community's emotional response manifested in various ways. Some former patients held vigils outside the hospital, mourning not just the institution's fall but the loss of what it had once represented. Others expressed their anger through protests and legal actions, channeling their grief into demands for justice. Catherine's presence in the hospital created uncomfortable emotional dynamics. Staff members struggled between their natural inclination to provide care and their resentment towards her father. Her innocent suffering became a powerful reminder of how corruption ultimately hurts everyone, even those who seem to benefit from it. The hospital's support staff, cleaners, maintenance workers, cafeteria employees faced their own emotional trauma. Many had worked at Harrison Memorial for decades, considering it a second home. The institution's disgrace felt personal to them, as if a family member had been revealed as a criminal. Sarah's former nursing colleagues who had remained silent during her persecution now grappled with overwhelming guilt. Some sought her out to apologize, while others couldn't face her at all. The weight of their complicity through inaction became an emotional burden many struggled to bear. Emily's deteriorating condition amid the institutional collapse created a particular kind of heartbreak. Her quiet courage in the face of both personal and systemic failure served as a mirror, reflecting back the best and worst of human nature to all who witnessed her struggle. The emotional impact extended beyond the hospital walls. Families who had lost loved ones under Cooper's administration now questioned every interaction, every decision, every moment of their grief. The revelation that their tragedies might have been influenced by financial considerations reopened old wounds. William's relationship with his own son, Tommy, underwent a painful transformation. Their conversations about that long-ago night when Sarah saved his life became fraught with new meaning. Tommy's anger at his father's role in Sarah's destruction, though tempered by understanding, created an emotional distance between them. The hospital's board members faced their own emotional reckonings. Some retreated into denial, others into despair. The realization that they had failed in their fundamental duty to oversee the institution's ethical behavior led to deep personal crises for many. Through it all, the remaining medical staff struggled to maintain their professional composure while dealing with their own emotional trauma. They had to continue providing care even as their workplace crumbled around them, forcing them to compartmentalize their feelings in ways that would have long-lasting psychological effects. Cooper's personal tragedy with Catherine created a complex emotional resonance throughout the hospital. The sight of the man who had caused so much suffering now suffering himself inspired conflicting feelings of justice, pity, and recognition of shared humanity. As the full scope of corruption emerged, each new revelation brought fresh waves of emotional devastation. The understanding that they had all been part of a system that prioritized profit over human life created a collective trauma that would take years to process. The final layer of truth at Harrison Memorial emerged from an unexpected source: Catherine Cooper's medical records. As she recovered consciousness, she revealed to Sarah that she had been secretly gathering evidence against her father for months. Working with a small group of trusted staff, she had documented years of fraudulent practices, waiting for the right moment to expose everything. Catherine's revelation stunned everyone, particularly her father. She explained how she had discovered the truth while interning in the hospital's administrative office during summer breaks. Access to internal systems, granted casually due to her father's position, had allowed her to uncover the full scope of the corruption. The accident that brought her to the hospital had occurred while she was on her way to meet with state investigators. The evidence she had gathered was devastating in its completeness. Every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated record, every instance of denied care had been meticulously documented. She had even maintained correspondence with former employees who had been forced out, building a comprehensive picture of the hospital's descent into corruption. Sarah found herself forming an unexpected bond with Catherine during these revelations. The young woman's determination to expose the truth, even at the cost of her relationship with her father, resonated deeply with Sarah's own experience. The conversations during Catherine's recovery became a crucial part of the healing process for both families. The most shocking revelation came when Catherine exposed the existence of a second set of books, maintained in an offshore account. These records showed that the corruption had begun even earlier than suspected, predating Cooper's tenure as administrator. The hospital's ethical decay had roots stretching back decades, implicating previous administrators and board members. But William Harrison was forced to confront his own family's role in this longer history. Documents revealed that his father, the hospital's former chairman, had initiated some of the earliest corrupt practices under the guise of financial efficiency. This discovery shook William's understanding of his own legacy and purpose. Cooper's reaction to his daughter's revelations proved unexpected. Rather than anger or denial, he showed a kind of desperate relief. In a lengthy confession to the board, he described how the system had corrupted him gradually, each compromise leading to another until he could no longer recognize himself in the mirror. The final piece of the puzzle emerged when Catherine revealed the existence of a hidden fund accumulated through years of fraudulent billing. This money, intended as Cooper's retirement insurance, instead became the seed money for the hospital's reformation. In a twist of fate, the profits of corruption would fund its own correction. These revelations created a domino effect throughout Boston's medical community. Other hospitals, fearing similar exposures, began internal reviews. The corruption at Harrison Memorial had not existed in isolation. It was part of a larger system of healthcare exploitation that was now being dragged into the light. Perhaps the most poignant revelation came from Emily herself. During her treatment, she had been keeping a journal documenting her experiences. Her perspective as both a patient and the daughter of a former nurse provided a unique window into the human cost of medical corruption. Her writings would later become a powerful testimony in the efforts to reform the healthcare system. Through all these revelations, Sarah maintained her dignity and focus on Emily's care. When asked why she didn't show more anger toward those who had wronged her, she simply replied, "Healing is more important than vengeance." Her words became a guiding principle for the hospital's eventual reformation. The truth, finally fully exposed, created an opportunity for genuine change. The revelations, painful as they were, cleared the air like a thunderstorm, making way for new growth. The question was no longer about who was to blame, but about how to rebuild something better from the ashes of corruption. Justice arrived at Harrison Memorial not as a swift sword, but as a gradual process of healing and transformation. The first step came when Cooper, influenced by his daughter's courage and his own near-tragic experience, voluntarily surrendered himself to authorities. His detailed confession, coupled with Catherine's evidence, provided the foundation for systematic reform. William Harrison took unprecedented steps toward redemption, liquidating much of his personal fortune to establish a victims' compensation fund. This fund, independently managed, began the process of reimbursing patients who had been overcharged or denied care. The gesture, while unable to undo past harm, marked a concrete step toward accountability. Sarah's professional redemption came through formal exoneration. A state medical board review, examining the evidence of her wrongful termination, not only cleared her name, but commended her early attempts to expose the corruption. Her nursing license was reinstated with full honors, though she chose to focus on healthcare advocacy rather than return to direct patient care. The hospital staff who had supported the investigation found their own path to redemption through active participation in the reform process. Many took leadership roles in establishing new transparency protocols and ethical guidelines. Their experience with corruption made them particularly effective guardians against its return. Emily's recovery, though still challenging, benefited from the reformed system. The same hospital that had once delayed her treatment now became a model for patient-centered care. Her case became a teaching example in medical ethics courses, helping future healthcare professionals understand the importance of moral courage in medicine. Catherine's role evolved from whistleblower to reformer. Despite her father's disgrace, she chose to remain involved in healthcare administration, working to implement safeguards against future corruption. Her unique perspective as both a victim and witness made her an invaluable voice in the reform process. Cooper's acceptance of responsibility had an unexpected ripple effect throughout the medical community. Other administrators, seeing the consequences of corruption laid bare, began voluntary disclosures of their own ethical breaches. The culture of silence that had protected wrongdoing began to crumble. The hospital board underwent complete restructuring, with new members chosen for their commitment to ethical healthcare rather than business connections. Patient advocates and medical ethics experts were given voting positions, ensuring that profit would never again override patient care. William's personal redemption came through active engagement with the communities his hospital had harmed. He spent countless hours listening to affected families, understanding the human cost of corporate healthcare, and working to implement their suggestions for reform. His transformation from corporate chairman to patient advocate became a powerful symbol of change. Perhaps most significantly, the reformed Harrison Memorial became a national model for healthcare transparency. The same systems that had once hidden corruption were redesigned to ensure complete visibility of all medical and financial decisions. Regular audits, patient oversight committees, and open documentation became standard practice. The process of redemption extended to the hospital's relationship with its community. Regular town halls, community advisory boards, and patient feedback sessions became integral parts of hospital governance. The institution that had once seen itself as above public accountability now actively sought community input. Even the physical hospital underwent transformation, with spaces redesigned to prioritize patient comfort and accessibility over corporate efficiency. The imposing administrative wing was converted into a patient support center, symbolizing the shift in priorities from profit to care. Through this process of justice and redemption, Harrison Memorial began to reclaim its original mission of healing. The institution that had lost its way found a new path forward, guided by the very people it had once wronged. The road to redemption proved challenging, but each step helped restore faith in the possibility of ethical healthcare. In the aftermath of Harrison Memorial's transformation, the most remarkable developments came from unlikely partnerships that emerged from the crisis. Former adversaries found common ground in their commitment to reform, creating alliances that would have seemed impossible months earlier. The most surprising collaboration formed between Sarah and Catherine Cooper. Despite their family's history, the two women discovered shared vision for healthcare reform. Catherine's insider knowledge combined with Sarah's frontline experience created a powerful advocacy team. Together, they began developing training programs to help healthcare workers identify and report ethical concerns. William Harrison and Cooper's former whistleblowers formed an unexpected coalition. The employees who had been forced out over the years brought valuable perspectives on preventing corruption, while William's business expertise helped make their solutions financially viable. And their working group became a model for other hospitals struggling with similar issues. Emily, despite her ongoing recovery, formed a youth patient advocacy group that included Catherine and other young people affected by medical corruption. Their fresh perspective and social media savvy brought new energy to healthcare reform efforts. The group's hashtag campaigns and personal stories reached audiences that traditional advocacy had missed. The hospital's reformed board included an unprecedented alliance between business leaders and community activists. Former opponents in healthcare debates found themselves working together to balance financial sustainability with ethical patient care. Their successful collaboration challenged assumptions about the inevitability of conflict between profit and ethics. Perhaps most surprisingly, some of Cooper's former allies in administration became dedicated reformers. Their intimate knowledge of how corruption had operated made them particularly effective at designing preventive measures. Their transformation from enablers to watchdogs demonstrated the potential for individual redemption. The medical staff formed new alliances across traditional hierarchical boundaries. Doctors, nurses, and support staff created joint committees to oversee patient care decisions. This collaborative approach, breaking down old power structures, helped prevent the isolation that had allowed corruption to flourish. Local community organizations, once skeptical of the hospital, became active partners in its reformation. Religious leaders, social workers, and neighborhood advocates joined medical professionals in patient support programs. These partnerships helped rebuild trust between the hospital and the communities it served. Former patients and their families, including those who had suffered under the corrupt system, formed support networks that evolved into advisory boards. Their experiences helped shape new policies on everything from billing practices to patient communication. The hospital's transparency initiatives were largely based on their recommendations, but even the local media, which had once been hostile to the hospital, developed a collaborative relationship with its new leadership. Regular access and honest communication replaced the defensive posturing of the past. Journalists became partners in holding the institution accountable while acknowledging its progress. The legal teams that had once opposed each other in malpractice suits found themselves working together on reform initiatives. Defense attorneys and patient advocates collaborated on new protocols for addressing medical errors honestly while protecting both patients and practitioners. Technical experts who had maintained Cooper's corrupt systems redirected their skills toward creating transparency tools. Their understanding of how technology could hide wrongdoing helped them design solutions to prevent future abuse. Their redemption came through using their expertise to protect rather than deceive. Healthcare workers who had been silenced under the old system partnered with compliance officers to create new reporting mechanisms. Their practical experience helped ensure that new policies would work in real-world conditions. The resulting protocols became models for other institutions. These unexpected alliances demonstrated that meaningful reform required diverse perspectives and experiences. The collaboration between former enemies proved more effective than any single group could have been alone. Their success challenged cynical assumptions about the impossibility of real change in healthcare. The transformation of adversaries into allies became one of the most powerful symbols of Harrison Memorial's renewal. It showed that even the deepest divisions could be bridged when people united around a common commitment to ethical healthcare. The transformation of Harrison Memorial reached its symbolic culmination 1 year after the crisis began, on the day Emily Miller completed her final round of treatment. The hospital that had nearly destroyed her life had become the institution that saved it, marking a full circle in its journey from corruption to redemption. Emily's recovery proved more than medical, it became a metaphor for the hospital's own healing. Her strength returned gradually, just as the institution rebuilt its integrity step by step. The day she walked unassisted through the oncology ward, smiling at staff who had become like family, represented victory not just over cancer but over a system that had once valued profit over human life. Sarah's vindication came in waves. First, the formal apology from the hospital board, delivered in a packed auditorium. Then, the creation of the Sarah Miller Ethics in Healthcare Award, given annually to staff members who demonstrated exceptional moral courage. Finally, her appointment as the hospital's first patient advocacy director, a position created specifically to prevent future abuses. William Harrison found his own resolution in stepping back from administrative control while remaining involved in the hospital's ethical oversight. He dedicated himself to sharing the lessons learned from Harrison Memorial's transformation, traveling to healthcare institutions nationwide to speak about the importance of maintaining moral integrity in medical administration. Cooper's story concluded with a measure of redemption. While serving his sentence for healthcare fraud, he became an advocate for reform, providing testimony that helped expose corruption in other institutions. His relationship with Catherine, though forever changed, slowly rebuilt itself around their shared commitment to preventing others from following his path. The hospital staff discovered a new sense of purpose and pride in their work. The fear and silence that had characterized the Cooper era gave way to open communication and mutual support. Regular ethics forums, where staff at all levels could raise concerns without fear of retaliation, became a cornerstone of the hospital's new culture. Catherine found her calling in healthcare reform, combining her business education with her first-hand experience of corruption's human cost. She worked alongside Sarah to develop training programs for identifying and preventing healthcare fraud, their unlikely partnership symbolizing the possibility of healing even the deepest institutional wounds. The reformed Harrison Memorial became a national model for ethical healthcare delivery. Other hospitals sent representatives to study its transparency protocols and accountability measures. The same institution that had exemplified healthcare corruption became a beacon of hope for industry-wide reform. Emily's dream of becoming a nurse evolved into something even more impactful. As she recovered, she began speaking to medical students about patient experiences, helping future healthcare providers understand the human impact of their decisions. Her perspective, as both a survivor of medical corruption and a future healthcare provider, proved invaluable. The hospital's physical transformation reflected its ethical renewal. The imposing administrative offices were converted into patient support spaces. The cold, corporate aesthetics gave way to warm, welcoming environments designed with patient comfort in mind. Even the hospital's motto changed from excellence in healthcare to healing with integrity. Community trust rebuilt slowly but steadily. Local families who had once warned each other away from Harrison Memorial began returning, drawn by stories of its transformation. The hospital's transparent pricing, ethical treatment protocols, and genuine commitment to patient care gradually earned back public confidence. The resolution brought personal healing for many involved. Staff members who had struggled with guilt over their silence during the Cooper era found peace in their contributions to reform. Patients who had suffered under the corrupt system saw their experiences validated and their suggestions for improvement implemented. Perhaps most significantly, the resolution demonstrated that positive change in healthcare was possible. Harrison Memorial's transformation from a symbol of corruption to a model of ethical care provided hope for reform throughout the medical system. The institution's journey proved that even the most compromised systems could be redeemed through commitment to moral principles and patient care. The day Emily walked out of Harrison Memorial for the last time as a patient, she left behind an institution fundamentally different from the one she had entered. Her mother's vindication, William's redemption, and the hospital's transformation had converged to create something new, a healthcare facility that truly put healing first. The transformation of Harrison Memorial sparked a nationwide movement for healthcare reform that extended far beyond the hospital's walls. Within 2 years, similar investigations were launched at major medical institutions across the country, each revealing varying degrees of systemic corruption that had once seemed untouchable. The Sarah Miller Whistleblower Protection Act, inspired by her story, passed through state legislature with unprecedented bipartisan support. The law provided comprehensive protection for healthcare workers who exposed unethical practices, ensuring that no other medical professional would suffer her fate for doing the right thing. Emily's case became a cornerstone of medical ethics education. Her journal, published with additional commentary from healthcare professionals, became required reading in medical schools nationwide. Students learn not just about the technical aspects of medicine, but the crucial importance of moral courage in healthcare delivery. The Harrison Memorial model of transparency and accountability began spreading to other hospitals. Their digital tracking system for treatment decisions and financial transactions, designed to prevent future corruption, was adopted by healthcare facilities across the country. The same technology once used to hide corruption now ensured transparency. Catherine Cooper's work in healthcare reform expanded beyond individual institutions to address systemic issues. Her unique perspective as both a witness to corruption and a catalyst for change made her a powerful advocate for industry-wide reform. Her testimony before congressional committees helped shape new federal healthcare regulations. The partnership between Sarah and William evolved into a national consulting firm specializing in healthcare ethics and reform. Their combination of frontline medical experience and administrative expertise proved invaluable to institutions seeking to prevent or address corruption. Their success demonstrated that ethical healthcare could also be financially sustainable. The reformed Harrison Memorial became a teaching hospital with a unique focus on ethical medical practice. Its residency program, now highly competitive, attracted medical professionals specifically interested in combining clinical excellence with moral integrity. The hospital's emphasis on ethical decision-making became as important as its medical training. Community involvement in hospital governance, pioneered during Harrison Memorial's transformation, became a model for other institutions. Patient advisory boards, community oversight committees, and transparent decision-making processes were increasingly adopted by hospitals nationwide. Research programs at Harrison Memorial shifted focus to studying the relationship between ethical healthcare delivery and patient outcomes. Their findings, demonstrating that moral integrity in medical practice led to better health results, provided scientific support for the importance of ethical reform. The hospital's financial transformation proved equally influential. Their transparent pricing model, ethical billing practices, and commitment to accessible care demonstrated that hospitals could maintain financial stability while prioritizing patient welfare. Other institutions began adopting similar approaches. Emily's youth advocacy group grew into a national organization, connecting young patients across the country and amplifying their voices in healthcare policy discussions. Their perspective brought fresh energy to reform efforts and ensured that future changes would consider the needs of younger patients. The legal framework established during Harrison Memorial's reformation created precedents for addressing healthcare corruption nationwide. Their methods for investigating fraud, protecting whistleblowers, and implementing reforms became templates for other institutions facing similar challenges. William's new role as an advocate for ethical healthcare administration influenced a generation of hospital leaders. His candid discussions about the dangers of prioritizing profit over patient care, drawn from personal experience, helped change the culture of hospital management across the country. The impact on medical education extended beyond ethics courses. Medical schools began incorporating lessons from Harrison Memorial's transformation into their curriculum, ensuring future healthcare professionals would understand both the importance of ethical practice and the mechanics of preventing corruption. The ripple effects of Harrison Memorial's transformation continued to spread, influencing healthcare policy, medical education, and hospital administration across the nation. What had begun as one institution's crisis became a catalyst for systemic change, proving that meaningful reform was possible even in the most entrenched systems. 10 years after the crisis that transformed Harrison Memorial, a special ceremony marked the hospital's complete rebirth. The occasion was the graduation of Emily Miller from medical school, now doctor. Emily Miller, preparing to begin her residency at the very institution that had nearly failed her a decade before. The hospital's main auditorium was filled with faces that told the story of transformation. Sarah, now a distinguished healthcare advocate, sat in the front row, her eyes bright with tears of pride. William Harrison, his hair now fully white but his spirit renewed, stood at the podium to deliver the keynote address. Even Catherine Cooper attended, her presence a testament to how completely the old wounds had healed. Emily's graduation speech captured the journey perfectly. 10 years ago, I lay in this hospital fighting for my life, she began. Today, I stand here ready to help save others. This isn't just my story, it's the story of how crisis can become opportunity, how corruption can be transformed into integrity, and how enemies can become allies in the pursuit of something greater than themselves. The ceremony included a special moment when Emily received her white coat from Sarah, breaking with tradition but perfectly symbolizing the continuity between past and future. Mother and daughter embraced on stage their personal journey from victims to leaders in healthcare reform, moving many in the audience to tears. Around them, the transformed hospital bore little resemblance to the institution of 10 years ago. The walls, once decorated with corporate awards, now displayed artwork created by patients. The former executive offices had become community health centers. Every corner of the building reflected the fundamental shift from profit-driven healthcare to patient-centered healing. The most powerful moment came when Emily walked through the oncology ward where she had once been a patient. Current patients and their families lined the hallway, applauding the living symbol of hope she had become. Her old room had been converted into a special consultation space, named the Miller Family Room, where difficult conversations could happen in an environment of trust and support. Dr. Cooper, watching the ceremony via video link from his rehabilitation facility, where he counseled other healthcare professionals about ethical practices, sent a message that was read aloud: from the deepest darkness can come the brightest light. Thank you, Emily and Sarah, for showing us the way. The day concluded with the announcement of a new initiative, the Harrison Miller Center for Healthcare Ethics, dedicated to continuing the work of reform and transformation. The center would serve as both a watchdog and a guide, helping other institutions navigate the challenges of maintaining ethical healthcare in a complex world. As twilight fell over Harrison Memorial, Emily took one final walk through the hospital corridors with her mother. They paused at each significant spot: the bench where Sarah had waited that first night, the emergency room where their journey began, the ICU where Emily had fought for life. Each location now held different memories, transformed like the institution itself. The security guard who had once tried to remove Sarah from the premises now held the door for them, offering congratulations to Dr. Miller. The nurses who had witnessed their struggle now welcomed Emily as a colleague. Even the physical space seemed to embrace them differently, the evening light casting warm patterns through windows that had once seemed cold and institutional. Their final stop was the hospital's new garden, created where the administrative parking lot had once been. Here, among the healing plants and peaceful paths, mother and daughter sat together in quiet reflection. The hospital behind them stood as a testament to the possibility of transformation, while before them stretched a future full of promise. "Ready for tomorrow?" Sarah asked simply. "Ready," Emily replied, her new white coat gleaming in the sunset. "There's still so much work to do." Above them, the hospital's new motto caught the last rays of sunlight: healing with heart, leading with integrity. The words, more than just a slogan, represented a promise kept and a future secured. As we conclude this powerful story of redemption and transformation, we invite you to become part of our storytelling community. Your support through channel subscriptions helps us continue bringing these meaningful narratives to life. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and family. Every share spreads the message of hope and resilience that Sarah and Emily's journey represents. Take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. How did this story affect you? Which character's journey resonated most with your own experiences? Your engagement creates a valuable dialogue about healthcare ethics and human compassion. Would you like to hear what happens next? The story of Harrison Memorial's transformation continues with new challenges, unexpected alliances, and deeper explorations of healthcare reform. Let us know in the comments if you're interested in part 2, where we'll follow Emily's journey as a doctor and the ongoing evolution of ethical healthcare. Remember, your support through subscriptions, likes, and shares helps us create more compelling content that matters. Together, we can continue exploring stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity.